Call the meeting to order. Sorry for the late start. It's about 2 minutes after 7. Got caught by one of the many trains that goes through town. It is Thursday, December 19th. This is the Village of Riverside Board of Trustees regular meeting, and I would ask our clerk to please call the roll.
President Self.
Here.
Trustee Sussman. Here. Trustee Hamilton. Here. Trustee Collins.
Here.
Trustee Valerie.
Here.
Trustee Collins. Here. Trustee Cole.
And we have a quorum. I'd please ask you to rise to the pledge.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you and happy holidays to everyone. For the folks watching at home, those here in our meeting room. Folks that are here, as always, you're welcome to speak at any time. You can speak during public comment at the start of the meeting, or if you would like to address a particular agenda item, you're welcome to speak at that time as well. I do ask that you be recognized by the president and speak from the podium so that the folks at home can see and hear what you have to say. First up this evening are presentations and public comment. Would anyone like to address the board generally? Mr. Ballerine, I think you have
I would if I could. I've been asked by Adriana and Randy at Floor to mention on December 28th from Saturday from 12 p.m. to 3 p.m. Adrian Peterson from the Chicago Bears will be having a book signing there. Just briefly, if you didn't know Adrian's background, this book is the story of how I was able to overcome snickering kids in school, headache-inducing hours of speech therapy, he had a stutter, and choppy conversations with baffled reporters and coaches to capture one of those coveted spots in professional football. The story is not mine alone. It's the story of anyone who has ever suffered from a disability, anyone who has ever felt that they were not capable enough or good enough or talented enough to reach for the stars. It is the story of anyone who allows their shortcomings to overshadow their talents and abilities. For those who were and are distracted by my disability, I simply say, don't diss my abilities. This is how I grew confident enough to say that and how you can get there too. So Adrian Peterson will be at the Floor on December 28th, Saturday from 12 p.m. to 3 p.m. for a book signing, and I'm sure he'll sign autographs also.
Okay. Thank you. Just in the realm of general information too, I would remind everyone that tomorrow is the Blythe Park PTA annual bake sale. So if you want to stock up on goodies for the holidays from 3 to 6 at Blythe Park School. Next up are village officer reports. First of all, I would say there will not be a meeting on January 2nd of next year, so our next regular scheduled meeting will be January 16th. I do have sad news to report to the community. The Judith Cezak, who was the chairman of the Historical Commission, passed away this past week. And it's a very sad thing. Judith devoted countless hours to the museum and strove to really elevate the professionalism of our archives and our museum quality overall. And she will be very sadly missed by everyone. Our condolences go out to her family and her friends. Next up is our village manager's report.
I only have one item to report, and that is a follow-up to an article that appeared in the Landmark concerning some of our residents who are near the Patriots Park area that had concerns with the lights and development of Costco on 26th Street. Staff did reach out to Costco, and they have agreed to change their lighting schematics so that the portion of the parking lot facing 26th Street will not be lit 1 hour after close to 8 a.m. And that they will try to limit the number of lights that they use to illuminate the perimeter of the building to avoid any other glaring nuisances to our residents. We did inquire in regards to planting materials along 26th Street, and they did not seem receptive to the idea. They felt that making the change to the lighting, timing of the lightings would address the concerns of our residents. In speaking with our Public Works Director and Parks and Recreation Director, one of the things that the village will do to help those residents is we were planning on making some additional plantings in Patriots Park, which we feel will hopefully address their concerns as well by providing additional screening to 26th Street. So we will continue to work that angle, but we do think Costco, this is something that they did not have to do for us, but they did agree to do this to help us address the concerns of our residents. So I am thankful for that. And that is all I have.
Thank you very much. Next up is the approval of the consent agenda. Do any of the trustees have anything that they would like removed for further discussion? Seeing none, I'd ask for a motion and a second to approve. Motion by Mr. Foley, second by Mr. Ballerine. Please call the roll.
Trustee Sussman.
Aye.
Trustee Hamilton.
Aye.
Trustee Pollak.
Aye.
Trustee Ballerine.
Aye.
Trustee Collins.
Aye.
Trustee Foley.
Motion carries.
Excuse me, Mr. President, I'd just like to comment that I thought those minutes were very good, Kathy. Merry Christmas. They were very good minutes.
That means you spelled her name right. That's right.
As always.
No, that's not what I meant.
Next up are reports of departments and commissions. I don't believe we have anything tonight, correct? Moving on to ordinances and resolutions. Mr. Mars, did you want to handle the first one? Sure. Since you were at the public hearing.
If the board will recall at your last meeting, you discussed some proposed text changes to both the village code and the zoning code relative to something we've been talking about for quite a while, which is combining the Plan Commission and ZBA, as well as making some changes to the site plan review process and landscape review process. And one other area. In the Parkway Planning's approval process and hardscape review. We had our public hearing at the Plan Commission last Tuesday. We had a good discussion of the ordinance. We talked about some elements of it. Everyone felt that it reflected the recommendations of the Plan Commission, and it was unanimously recommended for approval to you tonight with no changes from the form that you reviewed last meeting.
All right, so before we enter into our discussion, I would ask for a motion and a second to approve an ordinance amending various sections of the Village Code of the Village of Riverside and the Village of Riverside zoning ordinance relative to creation of a combined Plan Commission and Zoning Board of Appeals, changes to the site review process, hardscape review process, parkway plantings approval process, and other miscellaneous Village Code and zoning ordinance changes corresponding to all of the above.
I would like to make that motion.
Motion by Mr. Pollak.
Second.
Second by Mr. Ballerine. Discussion. Ms. Sussman.
I have several questions, and I'm glad that the chair of the LAC is here also. Perhaps she can help me. I'd like to, I'll do this in order. If we go to page, I guess it's page 35 of our deck, or page 7 of the packet specific to this. Mr. Mars, 85-3. I have a question about the public easement. When we say that it's unlawful for anyone to plant on a right-of-way or on private property within a public easement, that's always been a part of our code, I know that, but I know we don't enforce that. If somebody plants daffodils on the inner side, from the sidewalk to their house, nobody really does anything about it, and I was wondering if that's, we don't have to change it right now, but I'm wondering if that's something that we should discuss taking out at some point.
Yeah, I mean, you're saying that that's been in here, but it hasn't been consistently enforced.
Yeah, it's a hard thing to enforce because you'd have
Right.
to go through and measure the easement from the sidewalk toward the house each time, and that doesn't seem like a good use. Well, maybe you would volunteer to do it, but I'm not going to volunteer to do it.
Yeah, I mean, that is, just because that's been your past practice doesn't mean you couldn't enforce it going forward, as long as you're consistent in how you
Or we could
address it.
say there's no need to have it in the
Right,
code,
exactly.
and we could eliminate it.
So that's
Well,
maybe a policy issue for future discussion.
Right, I'd like to discuss that at a future
Sure.
time, but I wanted to bring that up. I had another one in that section, Diana, if you'll just, I have, and so that's one policy issue. The second one is, again, under 853B1. I understand that we have very well-trained public works who are very familiar with the kind of plantings we want in the village. I'm not convinced that we should remove some kind of quick oversight from one of the commissions for a commission having some kind of oversight over plantings in the parkways or in the parkways. And I don't know how,
Trustee, Ms. Mattia, did you want to address
you have
that?
to come up here and give your name and address too, Diana.
Good evening. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. My name is Diana Lamantia. I am at 234 South Coat Road, and I am here tonight on behalf of the Landscape Advisory Commission. I'm the chairperson for that commission, and so I just wanted to be here to be a part of this discussion. I have limited documents, so I'm not sure what every paragraph is that you're referring to, but I can support or at least help you understand what Trustee Sussman just brought up. So the first one that
Ms.
you
Lamantia,
mentioned.
could I ask you to hold on? Richard, did you?
I have some comments.
Oh, after she's finished. Okay, sorry.
The first one that you mentioned was the public easement, and I can say that this is a discussion that goes on formally and informally regularly, and I would think that it would be okay to remove from the ordinance in that the easements are very erratic throughout the village. Some go substantially up on what people consider their property beyond where the sidewalks are, and others are very much tighter to the sidewalk. So again, to be able to know exactly where that easement is, may not be illegal to plant on there, but it is still village property. So I can only add to your understanding of the situation as you make your decision. What was the second one, Jean?
Well, the second one was really, I'll just ask you if the LAC agrees with taking any oversight over plantings in the parkways.
Yes, it's been our experience. The current Public Works Director and Village Forester are terrific about collaborating with us, and they also have a history and they understand better than us what to put in the parkways. But should those positions change, you know, if there were different people sitting in those positions, I could see where the village would want to have some kind of a checks and balances. And, you know, if somebody came in and just had a very different understanding of how the plantings should be in the parkways, that there should be a general ability to temper that in the ordinance. So right now, Mike, Mr. Collins, our forester, does not come in and ask our approval. He plants what he sees fit on the parkways, and he does a lovely job. So if he has a question, he'll bring it in and say, I was thinking this, what do you think, to the Landscape Commission? I'm not sure that we would ever be able to oversee everything he does. It's just too much.
Well, that's fine. I'll let that one go. That's fine.
Okay? Thank you.
Thank you, Diana.
And I have more comments, but I think Mr. Reyes has wanted to say something.
Rich Ray, 262 Lionel. Speaking to that issue, the Preservation Commission this week reviewed changes to the Preservation Ordinance and the Landscape Advisory Ordinance, taking the responsibility for oversight of landscaping planning in the village from the Preservation Commission to the Landscape Advisory Commission. So suddenly, you're going to find a lot of language that you didn't find in your ordinance before when that is reviewed. And The other thing I wanted to comment on was using the word parkway. I think we have a definition problem here, as it's been touched upon. The parkway is commonly thought of as that space between the public sidewalk and the street.
Right.
As we know, the lot lines in Riverside are some cases substantial. I know places where it's 10, 15 feet in back of the public sidewalk. Most residents don't realize that. We all have this concept that we're paying taxes on the land all the way to the street, and then we're going to plant what the heck we want there. So it's been contentious for the 40 years that I've been in the village, plus years, serving on the Plan Commission where we face this problem. The idea of the village exercising control over what is planted in that part of the public right-of-way, which is beyond the sidewalk. And that is, of course, gets really complicated if you happen to have a corner lot. So I think that needs clarification. And then in the recommendations that I submitted on the proposed changes to the preservation and the landscape advisory ordinance, I recommend a definition. And I recommend it, instead of getting tangled up in all the terminology that's spread around all over the thing. Sometimes it's called parks, and sometimes it's called commons, and sometimes it's called play areas, and sometimes it's called parkway, and other places called pocket parks, and it shows up as triangular parks in another part. You know, to avoid all the problem of that, simply say that public lands, and public lands are all the lands which are owned by the village. And the oversight we're talking about and the application of those principles of homestead, which are set forth in the ordinance for planting, we should adopt the term public lands and then define it. And if we define it as all land owned by the public, then all of those problems go away of whether it's a pocket park or a triangular park or a parkway or a commons or a playground. Whatever it is, it's public land. And if you want to relinquish the responsibility for oversight of planting on that part of the public right-of-way, the street right-of-way, literally, that's beyond the public sidewalk, or in some cases there are no sidewalks, from the street, you should exclude that from that definition. Okay, so the public property then is all the property owned by the village, with the exception of that part of the street right-of-way, which is on the property owner's side of the public sidewalk, or the street if there is no sidewalk. So I think you got to think about that. It's tough to enforce that requirement. We struggled with it on the Plan Commission for years because we had some responsibility for that in those days. We struggled with it. There are actually local historic landmarks in the village that have high hedges right out on the sidewalk line. You can't even see the house, you know, for instance. And that's how we happened to come across that problem. And people plant all kinds of things along the edge of the sidewalk. Some of them are just low hedges. Some of them are huge. And it's got to be addressed. Now, whether you can go back, and we toyed with asking the board to have the homeowner remove those plants where they were an obstruction to the view of the historic landmark. The board elected not to do it. But then they sort of elected to ignore that requirement of the code that there's jurisdiction over that. If you want jurisdiction over that, then you're going to have to establish a permitting process. honest-to-God permitting process where people are going to plant something in their front yard. They're going to have to come to the village and seek a permit. They're going to have to come with a plat of survey so that we can establish where the lot line is. And then all that area that's in the street right-of-way, they'd have to withdraw their landscaping from there. And incidentally, that extended to sidewalks. We struggled with that, and driveways, believe it or not. Even though we struggled with the aprons, and you're still struggling with it, I think, we struggled with that part of the driveway, and even the sidewalks, if they continued all the way to the public sidewalk. Some jurisdiction over that as part of, guess what we call now hardscape, you see? So I'm thinking that you're going to have to take a hard look at that. I made some suggestions in the memo that I submitted to the village in my review of that, those ordinance changes. Since I'm here and I have the opportunity, I want to take advantage of the opportunity to wish all of the trustees a great Merry Christmas and a prosperous New Year, as well as our village administration, our police department, our fire department, our public works group, all of those fine people that work so hard for us, the citizens in this town. We're indeed fortunate to have such wonderful people. And I wish them all a happy and prosperous New Year as well as a Merry Christmas. And I suspect that I owe that to a lot of other board members. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Richard.
Thank you, Mr. Ray. That was very kind.
Okay, so there were really two issues raised by Mr. Ray. One is, do we enforce the plantings? And then, but the other one that I was asking about is whether it's okay to, and I heard what you said, I guess I'm all right then if Public Works is directly responsible for what goes on in the parkways.
Okay.
But that's not the way it is.
That's what's being changed. That's the proposal for change.
Well, then you're going to have to look at those changes which were
Richard, can
submitted.
you, sorry.
The issue that you're raising would probably be better discussed when we get to the Landscape and Preservation
Exactly.
Commission changes for later on.
Okay, that's fine.
That's where
Okay,
that relates.
I'm going to keep going then. At the top of page 8, so that would be section 813-1A. Mike, does this mean that anybody can put anything on village property for 72 hours?
Do you give the site again?
It's page 8 of the short document. It's page 36 at the very top. It says you can't put anything permanent as defined as any period greater than 72 hours. Do we have something that says you can't put anything in there at all? Or can we just go erect whatever we want for 72 hours?
Well, I think this has to do with hardscape, and that is existing code language.
Oh,
so
I don't remember that. Yeah.
If I may, what this is saying is that if you need a permit if it's more than 72 hours.
But you don't. You could put something.
Doesn't mean you can put something there
Oh, it
less
just
than
means.
72 hours. It just
Okay.
means, I mean, I still think if you are putting something in a public right-of-way, you got to have village approval, period. This is saying that if it's something permanent, it requires a permit.
right, and this is just a portion of the section. I'm sure there's probably
Okay,
something that
that's fine.
that addresses depositing things.
I was
on
thinking of
public
all
property.
sorts of things I could put up for 72 hours. That's fine.
There'd be other provisions.
Okay, so I'll keep going. So under.
I'm sorry, actually, that goes to vehicles. People were parking boats, people were parking RVs on the end of their driveway, which was in fact in the public right-of-way and under the jurisdiction of the village.
Well,
I think and I even remember that problem, and I think that's how it got there.
Yeah.
You can park.
That's
your
also
car.
addressed in the residential zoning.
Yeah.
Okay, so then in D2, this is a philosophical question, and a couple of things. One is, I thought the LAC did not want to be involved with hardscape at all. I thought that was a decision that the commission made, number one. And then number two, I am concerned that we're saying in the downtown, there is no commission looking at hardscape, and the Board of Trustees doesn't look at any change of hardscape. And I am uncomfortable about that. I think there has to be some kind of general oversight. I don't want to get, Richard, I don't want to get into an argument about whether the downtown was a part of the original Olmsted plan or not, but it is a part of who we are as a village, and it is a part of what we look like. And I understand and I agree completely with the need to try to expedite, to try to shorten the chain of decision-making. But going from having 2 commissions looking at it to having nobody look at it except for Public Works, I have a hard time accepting that, because I would give examples. I think that I know that it was probably a painful process for certain people within the village to look at benches and drinking fountains and bicycle racks. I'm not looking at anybody and that sort of thing. However, there should be consistency on that, and it should blend with what the rest of the village is, and it should resemble what goes on around the water tower and those kinds of areas. So I don't understand why we couldn't leave it under landscape, except I thought landscape didn't want hardscape, or under preservation, just for some kind of quick review. We could say it had the commission has to meet within 30 days of the proposal, or we're going to deem it okay by the commission. I'm sorry, Ben?
No, that's not.
I mean, we could do that just like we put time limits around some of these other things. We could say from the Preservation Commission needs to meet within 30 days, or it'll just be assumed that there's no issue with it and we'll go forward. Because I understand that it's convoluted, and I understand it takes forever to make decisions sometimes in this village, but going from having too much oversight to having no oversight, I don't think that's the way to do it.
Diane?
Okay, thank you. Following the submittal that we gave to the Board of Trustees, the Landscape Advisory Commission is comfortable overseeing the hardscape. We don't have a strong position that it has to be ours. So what our paragraph said, we said that we've noted the consistency for items such as benches and waste containers, and it keeps coming up in our meetings. It's an overlapping responsibility that might belong to either the Preservation Commission or our commission, and it should be defined one way or the other. So we absolutely think that somebody must oversee these things for the consistency throughout the village, because if you look at benches, for example, in one part of town, it's different than another. In this park, it's different than in that park. I want to go to the CBD, but I don't think we're ready to go there yet. But just the consistency of items, whether it's planters in the CBD and perhaps at an entrance or a public building, there needs to be consistency, and it's really gotten pretty random, and it's not telling one story throughout the village. So the LAC is glad to have that, or if you feel it's best in the hands of the Preservation Commission, that's fine. But the LAC definitely agrees that it should have an oversight of some commission to follow up on signage, all those hardscape items.
So just as a point of clarification, the proposed change, both Preservation and LAC would retain advisory review outside of the business districts. The only thing that's being removed by this...
I understand.
But to Chairperson Lamentia's point, so under this proposed change, LAC and Preservation would still review hardscape recommendations for every place except the B1 and B2.
So is this motion that you're overlooking the entire ordinance, or just for zoning and preservation? I just want to make sure I'm in the conversation where I need to be. I'm not certain.
No, you're exactly on point.
Okay, so this is all of the ordinance changes is what you're addressing?
Well, what we're talking about now are the ones that were reviewed at the public hearing the other night.
Okay.
With regard to this is the primary focus here is with regard to the combining of the Plan Commission and the Zoning Board of Appeals, and then these are supplemental changes that go to the site plan review and an attempt, as Attorney Morris said at the meeting the other night, attempt to make kind of a one-stop shop with regard to the business districts. Later in the meeting, we're going to be discussing for the first time, propose changes to the Preservation and the Landscape Advisory Commission ordinances that you had made recommendations
Okay.
from your commission.
All right, so I think it would be appropriate for me to voice, and actually I can read one of the responses. I think it's very well composed by one of the commissioners on the LAC, and it should be Kathy Maloney's quite an established writer. But she mentions, let's see here, the business district, that it was removed from the LAC in its entirety. And we were very concerned about that, as a matter of fact, and I think she eloquently states it, if you'll be patient with me here. She writes, "The business district is specifically excluded from the LAC purview. To exclude the LAC input on the business district, the first impression many visitors have of Riverside invites discontinuity of design with the downtown and remainder of the village, and a disregard for a possible Olmstedian treatment of same." Okay, so just so you understand, we also recognize that it's a very separate entity from the rest of our village. Perhaps there is a concern that the LAC would rigidly impose a naturalistic design on the CBD. This undermines the very creativity of Olmsted himself, who was first and foremost a landscape architect, who chose plantings and design style to be appropriate for the setting. He was not a one-size-fits-all guy and would have chosen harmonious plantings for the business district on Burlington and Quincy had it been there at the time. Presumably, the LAC, in support of Olmstedian principles, would show this flexibility. We firmly believe that the business district should not be excluded from LAC advisory oversight. As the LAC, we should be concerned with the holistic blending of design for the business district and other public parkways. This does not mean imposing the same style across all. We would want something special for the downtown, both in homage to Olmsted and recognition of the exigencies of a commercial space. At a very minimum, the business district boundaries should be defined so that it's clear what you consider the central business district. Does it include Guthrie Park, Centennial Park? Is it just on Burlington and Quincy? So establishing those would be a minimum request. Also, I'd like to add that we have been developing the master landscape plan for Riverside, which you're all aware of, and one of our categories. So we have parks and triangles, and we're trying to get a common nomenclature for all these pieces of our public lands. And one of those is the CBD as a very unique entity unto itself. So we recognize that it's not something that's going to look like the side of the river, and it definitely needs to be addressed. So that's all.
I guess I would like, I'm more and more wondering if it's appropriate, well, I can keep going. I'm wondering if we should think about voting on combining the two commissions and perhaps do a little bit more work on this. Because I do think that, I don't think both commissions should get involved because that can delay it for 90 days. But I do think that somebody needs to be involved in this. One of the commissions should be involved.
We're talking about hardscape.
I'm talking about hardscape in the downtown, in the B1 and the B2.
What would you consider hardscape? Benches?
Benches,
Okay.
water fountains, bike things,
Bike racks.
curb cuts, bricks, or whatever kind of pavement, all that kind of thing that goes under hardscape.
But a half a dozen things? I mean, I'm just trying to think of.
Oh, well, I don't know. It would be, I think it's just defined in the ordinance. I don't know exactly, but it includes, for me, it means everything I said, including curb cuts and pavement.
We have that. We have barrier curbs and rolling curbs. I'm just thinking we're talking about benches, and I think we're pretty consistent with the benches that we've been ordering. There are some cement benches that float around town, but most of our benches are pretty much similar to the ones that are in Guthrie Park, the ones that say the Village of Riverside on the side. I mean, can't we have a policy or say these are the benches that we buy? Doesn't have to be from this supplier, just like just like we have for our streetlights. This is the design that we buy. And I don't care where you get it. Well, I guess I shouldn't say I don't care where you get it, but this is the design we want. This is the bench that we want. This is the bench style. This is the trash receptacle we want. This is the water fountain that we have decided is the most Olmstedian, and this is the bike rack that we think is best. And you have you know, a set group of items. And then you don't have to have a site review because you're going to do the same benches or the same basic thing all the time.
This isn't a site review.
I'm talking about going through preservation or going through LAC, because we know Peter or Ed Bailey are going to choose this bench, this receptacle, this water fountain, you know, these type of things. You know, why do we have to go to them and say, this is the bench we're going to put, when it's the same bench we've been putting in for 50 years?
Are you talking about the location of the bench?
No, I'm talking about the style of the bench.
But it's also about location.
Yeah.
It's also about location. And I guess I also think that, I understand we need to streamline the commissions and we need to expedite how we get business done here, but I think we still want community involvement in looking at some of this. And I still would like a group of community people to look at where they go, to get involved in driveways and in pavements and all that kind of stuff that we call hardscape in the B1 and the B2. And Diana, just so you know, that stuff is all divine. There are specific definitions of what the central business district does,
Okay.
and all that. So we can get that to you if you don't have it. But that's just my personal point of view. I think that the business, it's just interesting to me, the business district is as much a part of our village as anything else. And if we're saying we don't, but we are going to continue both landscape and preservation involvement outside the business district, which I frankly don't understand why we need both, but we're not going to have either of them involved within the business district. That in itself doesn't make sense to me either.
It sounds like to me what we're trying to achieve here is accountability and consistency. Is that correct?
Or design essentials, not necessarily, I mean,
Consistency of quality design essentials.
there you go, not necessarily the same
So,
bench. That's what I want to make clear.
We've done it by, we don't have a plan for that, correct? We don't, or do we have a document that says, here's the bench, here's the water fountain, to my knowledge, we don't have that. So that's job one. We need that. So once we have that, I believe that it will be more accountable and more consistent if we have the public works staff director responsible for implementing that, as opposed to a committee. And the committee should be involved in developing those guidelines and approving and recommending those to the village board. That is most definitely something we would want that committee giving their input in. But once that's adopted, it's a staff function. And there's no reason that every time you go back, unless someone says, I've got an idea, I want to do something that's different from the design guidelines, then they go to the Landscape Advisory Commission or whoever we designate and the village board. So I think the amendment as proposed is exactly as it should be, but there's a step that needs to probably occur before that or immediately after that, and that is to have the committee give us a recommendation to adopt these design guidelines for downtown hardscape, including location recommendations.
As opposed to, Doug, the rest of the village where uniformity might not be the guiding principle?
It's there too, but right now we're just talking about downtown.
Well, you're not going to find uniformity from park to park. That makes no sense.
Well, the design guidelines for the rest of the village may encourage diversity. I don't know.
I see. Okay.
But the design guidelines need to be there, and they need to be developed and approved or recommended by a committee and approved by the village board, and then implemented by village staff.
Well, that does take care of my initial response is some of my not being comfortable with this because it seemed arbitrary that we were just saying all of a sudden Public Works was going to make that decision. But you're talking about putting some constraints around it, and I know you're just chafing at the bit right now. Yeah.
I think that was a very accurate summary. I mean, I see it exactly the same way on behalf of the commission, and I'll just offer to the Board of Trustees that one of the things that are pending is potentially to have planters that are formally designed to represent our village in the business district. One of the arguments of the the businesses along there is they can't keep plants in there for various reasons, and one of them is because they get trampled. So if we had some kind of boxes, not necessarily that would be the solution. Is it boxes? Is it curbs filled with soil? You know, are the plants consistent, or can they choose what they wish? Those kind of decisions, that would concern the LAC to make sure that was appropriate to the village. And once it's established, you know, perhaps it follows exactly what you were discussing.
And a lot of this is probably going to occur if the village is successful in getting the grant.
Right, I understand.
A lot of this discussion will have to take place anyway.
Well, I'm fine with Doug's suggestion. I'd just like to see it codified so that that will follow these design concepts that have been established and reviewed periodically. That would be fine with me. Mike, could we do something like that?
I agree with Gene and I agree with Joe. And I think my frustration that I have in my own way, I guess, foray into working on a project, the one behind the building here, clearing that. And we did go in front of different commissions for that, and we did seek approval, even though we don't need it, since it is public land and we are allowed as a village to maintain our public land as we see fit. I agree with Gene. I want this to be a more streamlined process. I look to the LAC to preservation for ideas, but the implementation needs to be start here and then here, right here. And if we're looking to change the style of a park bench or a receptacle or a bike rack, then we can turn to these folks and have them throw their 2 cents in. But I think in the last 50 years that I've been around in this town, it seems things go at a snail's pace. And when change happens, there's a lot of people that are very upset about it, i.e. clearing up the river. This is something that has been neglected for well over 25 years. That we can't see it, we don't know it's there, and yet it's the main reason that we live here, and one of the main reasons that this town was developed. So in any way, shape, or form to streamline this process, was still having input from them, but the ultimate decision is ours. I'm all for it.
So maybe I can give just a little bit of the, sure, absolutely, please.
There is 2 parts to the hardscape situation. It's the item itself, which we have, in fact, come to terms with. Peter had to buy a special bench, right?
And bike rack.
And bike rack.
That
and,
costs twice the cost of what it would
exactly.
cost.
You know, that we've come to grips with that, and that's been adopted. The other part of that is where and how much. And the how much part is probably more important than the where part. But that needs review. It needs review in the Central Business District. Surely does. It needs review. And somebody should do it. Somebody should do it. That's all I'm saying. I'll give you an interesting view of something. I was on the Central Business District Development Committee, 25 years ago? And if you want to see what the ultimate plan was, look at the bank. You notice that the bank has diagonal parking, and you'll notice that it has raised curves around the bench, and they were much larger. You notice that? The bank did that. Mr. Miller, who was the bank president at the time, was on the Central Business District Development Committee, and they did that.
Just for clarification, you're talking about First American Bank.
Yes,
Okay.
that's right.
We have several banks.
That's true. That's true. Now, when the village obtained a grant from IDOT, when the Crosstown Expressway was abandoned, and all that money was already in the bank, so to speak, to be distributed, we jumped in and we got all the money to develop the Central Business District completely, all the sidewalks. However, it came with strings attached. Number one is we had to give up our diagonal parking. we had to go to parallel parking. IDOT considers diagonal parking dangerous. And they felt that the curbs around the planters were a hazard. And they said, nope, can't have that. So that's why they were eliminated. And as a result of that, they bought us the parking lots that gave us the access. I think I brought that up before, to the north and the south side of Burlington Avenue as part of their grant process. So that's how we obtained those 4 parking lots, all without any cost to the village. But we gave up a raised planting bed and we gave up our diagonal parking in order to get that. And it was a very big concern of the Central Business District Steering Committee, which is what it was a temporary committee at that time. And when its task was done, it was dispensed with, was the problem of the plantings not being protected somehow by a barrier. But there was a very, very long conversation about pots, you know. That's not Olmsted. Pots aren't Olmsted. Period, paragraph. Absolutely not. Planting beds, we could understand, but not big pots with trees planted in them like we see dying all over the place. You know, because plants don't live in pots very well. And so that was a problem, and we thought we had kind of mediated that problem with the design that we came up with that you see represented as the bank. And you'll notice that there's a concrete portion around those raised curbs so that one can get out of the car and not step into the planting bed. Just for historical purposes, because nobody remembers the Central Business District Steering Committee anymore. That happened a long time ago. All those people, I think I'm the only person alive that participated in that process.
Well, you say you're thankful to the trustees and the police and the fire, and I got to tell you, as a trustee, I'm very thankful to residents like yourself that can come to us and give us the history that a lot of us weren't alive to remember or even here at the time, so I appreciate that.
I didn't mention all those volunteers, all the commissions that we have. We have so many commissions, so many people. I doubt if people realize how many people are contributing to the fabric of this community. It's absolutely, I don't know what it's like at any other place, because I've never lived any other place, except my boyhood home in Owen Markham, which had no idea what they were doing at that time. But there's so many people involved, and so many people have an opportunity to contribute and participate. It's a unique place, and this is a very unique place, and we ought to be proud of it. Yeah. That's it.
So,
I guess I just so that I probably was the biggest proponent for this section, and that being because of the experience that I dealt with going through the various commissions to get bike racks and a grant that was available to the village, and because of the modifications that we had to make to the grant, we lost a significant number of additional racks that we could have put in because we had to go with an alternate design. I think my argument to this would be that the individuals such as myself and our Public Works Director, when we come here, I think after you're here for a while, you understand the community and you kind of realize what fits with the community. And I think that this was just one way of using past experiences on designs that have already been approved by the various commissions to take that forward, and that not having to go back to those commissions to say, we'd like to purchase another bench similar to the one that's already kind of been approved for this location. I don't believe the commissions are going to always know the best location for a bench or a rack, because a lot of factors go into placement of those hardscape items, and I just felt that staff, since we have a good collaborative repertoire with our commissions, would be able to make that judgment call. And that's the main reason why I propose this to
I understand that, and I also want to be a little stronger than you and say this is, the staff does, we have a very competent staff, and I in no way am saying that we can't allow staff or trust staff to make these kinds of decisions. It just struck me as such a huge change to say we're going from 2 commissions throughout the village to none in the downtown, and retaining those two commissions for the rest. And until Doug said, you said, let's come up with a list, I hadn't thought about that as an option.
A lot of other municipalities, the staff really kind of does have control of what gets planted in the district, where planters are located, where benches are located, and I was just kind of taking that and bringing it here.
Well, I think I haven't heard any disagreement on the basic principle here, and I'd like to see us move on from this. I would suggest we adopt the amendment as written, but concurrently direct staff to work with the Landscape Advisory Commission to develop those design guidelines so that you have guidance when you approve it.
I'd like to add a friendly amendment that says staff makes these decisions through utilizing the list or the guidelines,
Absolutely.
the established guidelines. Is that, Peter? That's all right with you?
Yeah.
I'd like to make a comment on that. I think it's an excellent idea, and I have a couple of examples for that. One, respectfully, to Trustee Foley, and the clearing of the brush by the river, because the idea was great. But it does take respect for the wetlands that I didn't understand before I was on the commission myself. So even as a trustee, knowing so much about our village, there's a riparian habitat, there are wetlands that are guided by state regulations, and you might not necessarily know about that. And one of the concerns that keeps also coming up is if things like that are going on, the LAC isn't always utilized to its capacity. And if there is something, as Trustee Sussman recommends, that you should at least touch base in case there are concerns like that you just might not have been aware of. It could save headaches down the line. I think it's a very valuable step in the process.
I agree.
And worth the time.
And that's a good example is what you said before, in that the village forester does approach the LAC whenever he has an idea or on a certain planting, and he runs it by you guys before he goes ahead with it.
When it's appropriate.
Right.
Because he doesn't ask us for every step. But
Right.
if he says, I'm thinking about this, he will run it by us, and we appreciate that, and sometimes we change his perspective, hopefully for the better. So I think it's a valuable step in the process.
So
Okay, I'm going to keep going. Sorry.
No, because I don't quite understand. I'm not sure quite. I understand what you're envisioning in this list. I mean, right now, if you look at the appendix in the preservation ordinance, you'll see the light standards, for example. I mean, are you envisioning that we're going to have a list of drawings of bench styles that we approve, drawings of container styles that we approve? Is that what
Yes.
you're envisioning?
Yes. Guidelines. I mean, if we're asking Public Works to approve these things, they need some guidance from us on what to approve.
The LAC
So-
has spent much time over those questions, and we actually have discussions saying, aren't these anywhere? Aren't these standards set up anywhere? Because it should be easy for them to refer to, we feel. And there should be drawings of those typical items.
Okay. We're all on board with that? Okay.
Okay, so,
So did you have a?
oh, yeah, sorry, but I'm off plantings and hardscape.
Okay.
If that's any consolation. So I'm now on page 10, which is D, procedure. And it's just cleaning it up a little bit, Mr. Mars. So that would be site plan review, D.
Yes.
I understand the steps, and I am really glad that we've shortened the whole process and made some of it voluntary and some of it not voluntary. The first part is really D1. Let's start with number 2. It's optional to submit your concept plan to village staff and to planning and zoning. Yet in number 1, we're still calling it a concept plan. In step 1, we're still calling it a concept plan. If I read this correctly, the first idea is you sit down with your ideas about what you want to do, and that's required. Or are we requiring, here's my confusion. Step 2 is voluntary, yet step 2 has all the requirements. You have to submit your concept plan, and staff has to check off everything to make sure it's complete before you can have a voluntary meeting. Step 1 also uses the word concept plan. It's not voluntary, and there are no requirements for the person interested. So I just want to make sure I understand this. Step 1, which is required, is you have to have something in writing. You don't have to have something in writing. All you have to do is be able to discuss your ideas, to get feedback from staff and from the Plan and Zone Commission. Whereas step 2 incorporates that feedback if you want, and then you have a chance if you want to sit down, and even though it's voluntary, you have all these prerequisites to have that meeting. Do I have that right, Mike? Sure. I was very confused. Sure, does that mean I have it right?
No, well, the way I understand it, and Ben and Peter, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but you know, you're coming, as a developer, you're coming and sitting down with staff, and you've got to have more than just your broad idea. You should have something that you can show them and talk about what kinds of relief am I going to need, what kinds of approvals am I going to need in order to move this forward. And it does include the word concept plan. And number 2, where we talk about the optional concept plan, that is taking that additional step and presenting all that for review and comment to the new Planning and Zoning Commission. That's optional. That's correct. So if you've sat down with staff and you've got things fairly fleshed out and everyone thinks you're on the right course and everything's looking good, you can then skip that concept plan time period where you're going before the Planning Commission and move on to just review and decision by the Planning Commission.
But that's what I'm unclear about. So the one that's required, which is, here's what I want to do, could you help me make sure that I'm on the right track, doesn't require anything specific from the developer.
I think the way it's set up right now is they have a preliminary meeting. They can. It's optional, where you can come in and meet with staff, and staff will tell you this is what yes or no on certain ideas, and then they spend money to develop a plan. I think what this will help shorten is, let's sit down right at the beginning and come to staff with more than just a piece of paper with an idea, and then we can really sit down and really direct you to, so you know exactly what to include in your plan. And then if you're comfortable enough after that meeting, you can go directly to the Plan Commission to have it considered. Or you can come back and say, you know what, I think I got everything that we talked about, but can you guys review it before we go to that next step?
Okay, but that doesn't answer my question, which is, number 1, if this is sequential, number 1 has no requirements. So if I'm a developer and I want to sit down and talk with, and I'm required to sit down and talk with staff and the option of the Plan Commission.
No, number 1 is required.
No, but I'm not required to bring any specific paper or any concept plan, even though that term is used. Number 2 is optional, and under procedure 2, which is optional, I'm required to do all this work. That's what I'm confused about. So it just seems to me if you're going to require, I guess what I don't understand is if you're going to require this initial non-optional pre-application meeting, are you requiring that the developer bring anything with her to the meeting?
Maybe I can address.
Well, it does require that a concept plan is presented for staff comment. It does require that. The concept plan and other information
That's
is
optional.
presented.
That's not, oh, no.
No, it's not optional. That's at the pre-application meeting.
Yeah, but I guess what
The
I'm...
problem
what I-
is they're calling it a concept plan, and then
And they
they're
shouldn't
calling
be
it a
doing that.
concept.
Right.
They
So I-
should-
I
So
think-
that's one thing.
Yeah, I think that's what you're stumbling over is
Well,
is
that and the fact that, can I just explain what I'm stumbling over? So I am stumbling over that, but I'm also stumbling over the fact that the optional meeting has all these requirements, but the non-optional meeting doesn't have any of those requirements. Doesn't say what you're supposed to bring in this,
Well, it
whatever.
does say you're supposed to bring a concept plan. They should move the definition of a concept plan up to before the procedure starts.
Well, except just to.
I don't think that's the
add to
idea.
this, one of the reasons you may not want to do that is
Yeah.
that additional step, which is optional, is going to require the expenditure of more planning and money. And I think it's designed for where some concepts, I mean, working with staff, a concept meeting at step one may and likely will occur on more than one time. And so staff is going to, on an as-needed basis, ask for more information, and they'll develop concepts. And those concepts, depending on how creative they are, if a developer wants to do something more quickly, may work with very black and white type things that they get a feel from staff are going to more easily go through the process, okay? And I think that's where they may elect, I'm not going to go to step two, the optional concept plan.
Right.
And if you go right to the final step, you got to provide a whole lot of stuff. But
Well-
you're going right straight for approval. The optional area is where maybe you're working in a gray area with a developer and staff, and they want to get a feel for before they really put in and develop those final plans, which will get the development approved. It's an optional in-between step to do a more in-depth review, and you have to have those requirements because you're not dealing with a flexible concept anymore. It's the group, it's the commission, and they need to be comparing apples to apples, whereas with staff, I think it's a more flexible.
Right, but even in the one that's not mandatory, you have to develop a lot of stuff. It says that all this paperwork has to be,
Right, but that's because that's a commission that's dealing with that. Even though it's the optional and even though it's still
Okay.
conceptual, you still need to be more formal because you're no longer dealing with Peter, who's dealt with a bunch of these before. You know, it's a body and a voting body, and so it needs to be a little more quasi-judicial, and you got to have a more formal
You
list.
have to bring them up to speed,
Yeah.
because they haven't been part of the whole pre-application meeting. and
That's my
everything like that.
reading of it, but it's optional because you can skip that if you get a real good comfort level, both staff, the things staff is saying, and the developer's feeling, and, you know, there are times where we want to be more cutting edge, and it's like, okay, I know that they've never done this before, I know staff has told me, oh, I don't know about this, but I want to go to the plan commission without doing a final thing, and I want to get a feel for what they think.
Right,
okay.
because there's a broad spectrum of development, so some are going to be maybe very straightforward and maybe not involve that much review, whereas others are, as Lance said, are going to be more cutting edge and you're probably going to want that concept plan review.
So Ben, to your point, can we change that first?
Well, I think all you have to do is just delete the concept plan and other. I think you could just say a pre-application meeting shall be held with village staff at which information about the proposed development
Yeah.
is presented.
That would work.
I think that would be very helpful.
Well,
Well, it was just prior to filing the optional concept plan. And I don't see the issue here.
Okay, it was just curious to me
Yeah,
that,
I got it, but I just don't see the issue. I understand what you're saying,
Yeah.
but I see that, you know, the pre-application meeting, you sit down and you try to get the parameters of what you can do and what you can't do. And as a developer, I can elect to then do the concept plan that is more detailed and more everything for my commissioners. But if I don't want to do that,
I can
I don't
take the
have to
risk
do it.
and go
I can take the risk and go right to the,
Okay.
right there. So
And I think that's what the Plan Commission, I think that's why they recommended exactly these changes. Because that by doing it this way, the pre-application meeting, to the attorney's point, is much more flexible and kind of
That's fine.
organic. And then the concept plan is really kind of a dry run. You know, if they're concerned about anything, now they have to basically put together their program and present it. And that was the part that the Plan Commission felt could be made optional and left to the discretion of the developer.
I do think it would clarify things greatly,
Yeah,
though,
we could strike
if we
that.
change that language the way you suggested.
No problem.
If I may, I think where we're trying to formalize this idea of a pre-application meeting too much. Yeah, the only reason, in my mind, the only reason that's in there is to put a developer on notice, oh, I got to call staff. You know, no developer's going to show up at a plan commission or file a full set of engineering plans and architectural plans and everything without having it fully vetted by staff first. So whether you say that's required or what you put in there really doesn't, I don't think it as a practical matter makes any difference, because no developer's going to come forward without doing that. So, you know, if you want to make those changes, that's fine. You know, again, the only real meat of that is to have something in there that lets people know, you know, my first step is to meet with staff. The concept plan versus the final plan, the vast majority of projects we're going to see in this village, the concept plan and the final plan are the same.
Yeah.
I mean, it's the choo-choo rebuilding the facade of their building. And there's no, you know, the only time that would come into play is if a new building were being built, like the Village Center building, where the developer doesn't want to do full architectural plans, just wants to do color renderings of the elevations and a site plan. That's a concept plan. If they've got a project like that they're very confident in, they can spend the money to prepare architectural plans if they want. Most developers would not. They'd want to have some entitlement before they spend that kind of money. But so anyway, that's, you know, I think the steps as a broad outline are exactly what they need to be. If everyone's more comfortable with making some of those changes, that's fine too.
Okay, so D1, line 5, the idea is we will strike the concept plan and other. Okay. Anything else on this provision? Okay.
I still have another question.
Okay.
Okay, so
What page are we at?
so step 1 is the required pre-application meeting. Step 2 is the optional plan, concept plan. And then when we go down to, and then under that, there's 1, 2, and 3, comments and suggestions after the conclusion of the concept plan review, Mike? Mm-hmm. And in there, if this is still part of the concept plan, it says under relief, which is 4, which I think still relates to the optional concept plan meeting, right? So this is on page 11, Mike, in the middle?
Yes.
It says, no request for relief from the provisions of the zoning ordinance shall be sought until the Planning and Zoning Commission presents the comments and suggestions to the applicant as described. So that means, so let's say I have to have a zoning waiver, right?
Mm-hmm.
That means if I choose to go through the concept review, then at that point, once I get the comments from the Plan Commission, even though then I would go to the Zoning Board of Appeal or to the Plan and Zone Commission.
Right. So you've gone to the Planning and Zoning Commission and presented your concept plan, you've gotten feedback, and then you can
Try to get a variation.
Then you can move forward with your proposed variations and
Okay.
special use requests. But if you skip concept plan, you would just ask for that zoning relief as part of your site plan approval if you needed any at the same time that you're.
So if you don't have the voluntary meeting, once you get before the boards for site plan approval, then you'd say, you'd still have to do.
If you needed relief, you would need to ask for it. This is a way to have a dialogue
Right.
to see whether you really need to do that once you get the input. The idea being that the reason you want to go before the Plan Commission with a concept is you think there might be some things I'm not sure I need to do. Maybe they have some ideas and you might actually make some changes in your own concept before you go forward. And you might eliminate the need for some of those after you've heard what the Plan Commission has to say, including how, you know, unsympathetic they seem to some of those forms of relief that you might.
Right, and then, so then the final thing is then zoning, planning and zoning review the site plan application, right?
Yes.
And does this mean that, it's inherent in here that this is an open meeting, that they will review it in an open meeting?
Yes.
Because it doesn't, in other parts of the code, we actually say that, but this just says it's going to review the written thing. Do we need to say, is it important to say it's going to be reviewed in a public meeting?
I don't think that's necessary because
they have to do it in
it's
public.
not something they could
Okay.
do in executive session, so.
All right. And so it's staying the same. If it's a regular zoning variation, then the zoning variation has to be approved by the Board of Trustees. If it's a site plan review, it only has to be reviewed by the Plan and Zoning Commission, unless there are zoning changes in it.
Correct.
Okay. All right, I think I may actually get it. Okay. That's it, thanks.
Anybody else? Okay, I do have one question for the trustees to consider. And it's on page page 5, 2-1-4, regarding the appointments, terms, and vacancies. When we first were working on this, I had considered the possibility of having a shorter term for the chairs on all of the commissions, because this provision now goes to all of the commissions. This would cover all commissions and boards and committees. And my thought was that either we would have a 1 year, or that's what I was thinking, was a 1 year term for the chair. And my thought was that by doing that, you allow the chairmanship to be moved around among various members in the various boards and commissions, to give people more experience and also to relieve some of the burden of constantly being the chair for your entire 4 or 5 year term. So that was my initial thought. And then when I spoke with Trustee Pollock, he was convincing that you do have a need of continuity for the chair position. But I'm still not completely convinced, and I'm wondering if perhaps there's a middle ground, that maybe we appoint the chair for a 2 year term, and after 2 years, that person can be reappointed if that is what wants to be done, or you could appoint somebody else. So I'd just like to have your thoughts about this question.
I think the way you just stated it is different than the way you stated it originally. The way you stated it originally is it would be a 1 year term, and your thought process behind that would be a rotation of that 1 year term, which goes to Doug's concern of, institutional knowledge and things like that. The way you stated it the second time is it'd be a 2 year term, and then after a 2 year term, then they would either, decide to no longer be the chair, or they would be reappointed. So I think that, then you're saying that, if Ms. Lamantia is the chairperson, there she can move closer to the microphone, for a 2 year period, you would have a review with her after 2 years and say, are you burnt out? Is this something you still want to do? Do you feel there's somebody else on the commission that wants to do it? Blah, 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 and then you get feedback. So I think that's kind of what whether it's a 2 year, I like the 2 year, or at least a 2 year review, that we do a review of all of the chairs after 2 years to make a decision whether they want to continue or whether, they want to,
But I think it's also whether we want them to continue.
Right, exactly. It would have to be mutual, exactly.
Right.
Well, but I would think the easiest way to accomplish that purpose then would just be make a 2 year term.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
So what is your thought about that?
I think that's a good idea. I think a year goes by so quickly. I think there's too much of a learning curve that you're not taking advantage if you don't have at least a 2 year term.
Mr. Wright?
I served on the Plan Commission for more than 20 years, and I've served on the Preservation Commission since it was established, and I'm still there. I tell you, continuity is absolutely necessary. If the chairman wishes to remain the chairman, he should remain the chairman. And what will happen, and I've seen it many times, is he'll just turn to somebody and say, are you ready to take this over? I'd like to step down. Like I stepped down to let Charlie take over. So that's important. That's important. Now, when you're talking about the term, if you're saying even a 2-year term for your chairman, you're meaning 2 years of his normal term, right?
Correct.
In other words, if you decided that it's going to be a 3-year term, you know, he'd serve only 2 years of the 3 years, or he or she, only 2 years of the 3 years. I think you'd be better off to just let the chairman continue as long as he feels it's right and the commission feels it's right. And, you know, there's a momentum about commissions. I've been there, you know. And after a while, you sort of say, you know, it's really time for me to get out of the way and let Joe do this, you know. And, you know, just sort of step down. But let him stay the commission for his 3-year term, if that's a 3-year term. And maybe the chairman should be selected by the commission instead of the president. You know, that works too, you know. But continuity is important. And the accumulated knowledge over a number of years is important on any commission. And you should be aware of that and be sensitive to it, in my opinion. Thank you.
Mr. Pollak?
I agree with Mr. Ray that continuity is a critical factor. But we also want to be able to make a change if we feel that it's necessary without having to kind of step on too many toes or buck the system too much. So I'm okay with 2 years, as long as we can reappoint that person if we want to.
Right.
So
So are we in consensus with that? Yes?
I just want to make a quick, believe it or not, a quick comment about this. I think you can maintain continuity and not have that person be chairman or chairwoman. You can still rotate that position and retain commissioners on a commission for a very long period of time. In fact, there's nothing in the proposed ordinance or the current one that says that limit on how many years or how many terms you can serve. And Richard, I understand what you're saying, and I've served on a commission where you were chair of it, and I have a lot of respect for you. It's also true that sometimes a new way of looking at something can be very helpful. I'm not talking about you, Richard, I'm really not. But it's also true that a new way of looking at something can be very helpful. And so I would encourage us to keep people on commissions as long as they're working on that commission, and I'm okay with the 2 years.
So could you just put language in here, making it a 2-year term and giving the right for reappointment, the option for reappointment? Is that okay, just to leave that for the attorney?
And you're still going to go with the 2 4
years.
years? How long can you be a chairperson then? 8 years or 4 years? 2 terms? What is?
Yeah, maybe we should.
Because it's in there.
Yeah.
It's in there. That's fine.
What's that?
Isn't there a term limit in at least what you initially proposed, Ben?
it was in there initially.
Yeah, I think it was taken out because
okay.
we had changed
All
it.
right.
Yeah, so I think we're okay with that.
So the 2 years could be just a policy decision, or we can add it to the ordinance, whatever you're
What
comfortable.
do you think's the better way?
I think it'd be good to add it, because then it forces the issue, and it also creates less of a feeling like someone's being pushed out.
Okay.
Okay, all right. So any further discussion on this one? Okay, so I won't laboriously read the entire motion again. I think we all know what we're voting on, so I would ask the village clerk to please call the roll.
Trustee Sussman.
Aye.
Trustee Hamilton.
Aye.
Trustee Pollak.
Aye.
Trustee Ballerine.
Aye.
Trustee Collins.
Aye.
Trustee Foley.
Motion carries. I just, before we move on to the next thing, this was a long and extensive process to get this done. And at our next meeting in January, I will be presenting to you the appointments for the new Planning and Zoning Commission. But before I do that, I would just like to publicly thank the members of the existing Plan Commission and the Zoning Board of Appeals, some of whom have served for a long time in their positions. And they've done a lot of good work for our village, and we really appreciate their creativity and their support in this entire process. So, next up is an ordinance amending Section 8.2.24 of the Village Code of the Village of Riverside relative to commercial filming, photography, and taping activities within the village. Mr. Scalera.
I will provide a quick summary of this agenda item. This was brought about really for two things. One, Finance Director Francis and I have been going through the village code and looking at our fees and just making sure that we are on par where we should be. And the other one is we've had a uptick in filming companies interested in Riverside and using Riverside as backdrops to whether it be television programs or a film or commercials. And looking at our current application, I didn't feel that it really provided some level of protection for our residents as far as notification goes, as well as protection of village property. And so working with all of the department heads, we looked at the existing procedures, and they provided suggestions to me, and then I worked with Michael to update the code section relative to these activities that take place within the village. And the fees that are associated with that, we really kicked that up to where we felt it's comfortable enough that we are recouping all of our costs associated with any manpower or equipment provided to the agencies that come into town. And so that is what you have before you.
So before we have further discussion, I'd ask for a motion and a second to approve the ordinance.
So moved.
Motion by Ms. Hamilton. Second by Mr. Foley. Discussion, please.
Public property. Private property. What happens if someone wants to do a photo shoot in my personal home that doesn't affect the village at all?
We still would require them to complete the suggested application in here to identify whether or not that's the case, and then staff would make the determination working with them on whether or not notification of adjacent neighbors should take place.
I don't know if we have the. I don't know if we have. I don't feel comfortable having, you know, if it's solely within private property. I don't know if we. I think that's overstepping our bounds a little bit on private property.
I think it's just a way for the village. Well, whenever, even if someone comes in and wants to shoot a commercial in your property and all of the equipment is going to be located on your property, a lot of times the individual or the producer or whatever the person is contacts the village to let us know. And all we're saying is we're not going to drag this out. We just want to know, and we just want them to kind of provide us, and usually that's through this application, which won't take that long for them to complete, just so that we know in the event that we get any calls that we can actually say this is what we know is taking place there. We don't want to prevent someone from having the right to open their home to a production company to come in and shoot something within their home.
But if it's actually a production company, they're probably going to have equipment and vehicles in that are going to be on public property. So, I mean, if it's a photographer coming into your home,
right,
that's one thing. There's not going to be any outside activity going on that anyone would even know about.
But it does say photography, though.
But I mean,
Filming, photography,
maybe we can narrow it down to you know, only if there's exterior activity that would be of concern to anyone else, you know what I mean? If
Right.
it's a photographer inside
Or
your house.
equipment that needs to be
Right,
placed on the
equipment or
right-of-way.
activity outside, lighting, anything that's going to bother someone else is a lot
Exterior
different.
lighting, but if it's handled within the confines of your home.
Right, then who cares? Right.
Right.
Yeah.
Other than that issue, are there other questions or comments about this, Mr. Pollock?
My only question, I emailed Manager Scalera about this. There's a reason why people want to film in our village. That reason is because we're a beautiful village, and it takes money to maintain this beautiful village that we have, the trees, the streets, and everything else. So I just want to be sure, and I'll trust whatever Manager Scalera reports to us, but I want to be sure that we're charging the most we can, quite frankly, without losing business. Yeah, I don't want to make us non-competitive, because there are other beautiful villages too.
Well, what I used is I used the actual cost, as well as I did look at other municipalities and their fees. And the fees that I'm suggesting in here put us right there with all of the other municipalities. You don't want to go too high, because then it's not going to be
Exactly.
attractive to them to come here.
Exactly. No, as long as we're competitive, and, I don't want to push the envelope too much, but don't want to leave anything on the table either.
The hourly fees that you have here for the different staff members, have we charged that in the past?
No.
And do you see, I mean, with me looking at this, these could really add up. Do you think this could be?
Well, a lot of
For example, if we have a patrol officer at $160 an hour and they are there for 3 days, and it could become excessive, I would
Right.
think.
Well, I mean, even with the last invoice that we sent to ABC for the betrayal shooting, the invoice was well over $10,000. The rate is very similar to what other municipalities are charging. And a lot of times, we work with the production agent to determine what is the best time, because there are times when they've asked for an officer for an 8-hour period, and looking at it, we tell them, well, you really don't need an officer for 8 hours. So, I mean, we've done that.
How cost sensitive do they seem? No. Okay, so I would just say that, since we're putting this in for the first time, to be aware that this doesn't become excessive, so that it is running people off.
And they can hire their own security. They need to. They do. Yeah,
They do.
Right. So they don't have to have a police officer watch their equipment.
And a lot of times what we've, at least in a couple of times here recently, they've not only used our officers, they've hired their own security detail as well.
And usually when the officers are being used, it's being there for
Traffic
control and things like that, which is the other question is there somehow that we could, I don't want to, force is too strong of a word, but I mean, these companies come in and I watch them run, back and forth to Starbucks, where, Grumpy's and LaFleur is just as close. Is there, or they do productions in here where they have a food caterer where, we have, Choo Choo and Molly's and all these other places. There's somewhere we can stipulate that we'd like to keep the business within the village.
I don't think that's legal, is it?
But you can certainly give a sheet of local
Right,
business.
when you meet with them, you can certainly say, we have these services, if you
And
want.
actually, when ABC was filming right here on the bridge, they did go to Fleur quite often for coffee.
Well, I just think it would be good if we had, a sheet of local businesses and
Right.
their what they can offer, what they can do, and blah blah blah.
The fact that Riverside Foods can provide lunches or whatever,
Right.
just something that lists what we can provide here in the village.
Perhaps we could make some kind of connection when we're contacted, make some kind of connection with the Chamber of Commerce. They may want to get together and make a deal.
And put that list together for us?
I think they already have a list. All I have to do is just
Yeah,
get it.
but I mean,
Yeah.
put something together directed towards film production companies.
It'd be good to have menus, that sort of thing available.
just to be able to promote our businesses more.
So with regard to the public-private property question, why don't we table this until our next meeting, and then you guys can work on on appropriate language to.
I guess.
I mean, I don't.
It's.
I know Peter's saying that. I think aren't you talking about looking at the impact of being on private property? It has to have some sort of impact on the street right of way or public property before the village would get involved.
Yeah, I mean,
so the
basically-
situation where we're talking about a photographer in a house would never come up.
Would never come up. Okay, or a film shoot inside a house, as long as it's within the confines of the home.
But if you're parking trailers up and down a block,
I agree with that, yes.
that
Or you
triggers-
have lighting outside that
Right,
could affect the
exactly.
neighbors.
Someone might be distracted or wonder what's going on, and
Okay, I
Peter
just wanna make
basically
sure.
said, that's what I look at, that's what the,
Right, okay.
we
So-
want to make
That's-
sure it is
I
all.
don't have a problem
So you
with
guys,
that.
you're
Yeah.
okay with the as drafted then? Okay, any further comment? Please call the roll.
Trustee Sussman.
Aye.
Trustee Hamilton.
Aye.
Trustee Pollock.
I,
Never know.
Trustee Valerie.
Aye.
Trustee Collins.
Aye.
Trustee Foley.
Aye.
Motion carries. Next up is a resolution authorizing the village president and village manager to enter into an intergovernmental agreement between the Village of Riverside and Riverside School District 96, and a memorandum of understanding with Riverside Brookfield School District 208 and Riverside School District 96 relative to the provision of school crossing guards. Perhaps I can just give a little background on how this came about. Over the last several months, I have been in communication along with Manager Scalera with the leadership at Districts 208 and District 96 about a number of things. We've been working together on the First Avenue redevelopment and the safety lanes and traffic signals and all that. And as part of those conversations, I asked them if they would be willing to take another look at how we currently fund the crossing guards. And I'm delighted to say that they were extremely open and willing to talk about it. So I met several times with President Mangia of District 96 and also representatives of 208. So what the village put together a proposal, an intergovernmental agreement that basically, with regard to the crossing guards, we have 6 crossing guards and 2 standbys. The proposal would be that we would share the cost of the crossing guards on a 50-50 basis between the Village of Riverside and District 96. And the memorandum of understanding you have before you has a little wrinkle because District 208 graciously offered to help pay for the First Avenue crossing guard. So with regard to that crossing guard, it would be a third. Each governmental entity would pay a third for that crossing guard. So that's what you have. Both the intergovernmental agreement and the memorandum of understanding have already been circulated to the attorneys for both District 96 and District 208. You have the changes that were suggested by them that will be incorporated into the agreement and the memorandum of understanding. So what the next step would be if, assuming that this board approves this, then District 96 will consider it at their January 21st meeting. And what we're asking for in here is should they have any minor changes that Manager Scalera and I have the authority to go ahead and make those changes and approve the final thing. But I have to say this was very gratifying. I mean, it's a kind of a new day in terms of our relationship with both District 96 and 208. There was an extreme sense of neighborliness and camaraderie and cooperation. So I'm really excited about this and hope it moves forward.
As it stands now, we fund the majority of them, but not all of them.
Right,
Okay.
right.
And I think this is a great way for multiple taxing bodies to come together and do what's best for the community as a whole. I mean, and I think we've come a long way with District 96, especially in the taping of their meetings. We have the same intergovernmental agreement. They pay us to tape their meetings, and if you look at the YouTube videos, District 96 meetings are watched, believe it or not, more than ours are. Believe it or not. And then, they get 200, 300, 400 hits. I mean, those are 400 people that didn't watch it before. And I think this is great that the schools understand that, when we did the crime mapping several years ago, I mean, you saw where our officers spend a majority of their day. And every time a policeman is pulled on the other side of, First Avenue, that's one less policeman that's on this side of First Avenue. So, it's a financial drain on this community. And I think this is a great way for the schools to kind of help alleviate some of that and work as all pulling the rope in the same way. So I appreciate you guys doing this and I appreciate the school boards discussing it and hopefully coming with the same conclusion we come with.
So I'd ask for a motion to approve a resolution authorizing the village president and village manager to enter into an intergovernmental agreement with Riverside School District 96 and a memorandum of understanding with School Districts 96 and 208 relative to the provision of school crossing guard services.
So moved.
Motion by Mr. Ballerine, second by Mr. Foley. Further discussion?
I have
Ms.
two
Hammond?
items that I've already brought up to Mr. Scalera. And the first is that I think because of the, gracious contribution being made by District 208, that crossing guard, the First and Forest Avenue crossing guard, should be removed from this agreement because otherwise it's too confusing. Is it 50%? Is it 33%? It's 33%. It's not 50%. Either that or amend this agreement to make reference to the memorandum of understanding, one way or the other, because it's just too confusing.
District 96 doesn't find it confusing. We can make that change if you wish.
I find it confusing.
I think that the issue is that in the one with District 96, it talks about they're paying 50%, and then in the one with 208, it refers to the fact that 208 is paying a third, of which a half is being reimbursed to 96.
Then make reference to the memorandum of understanding.
Just make reference in this one to the fact that they're paying 50%, but one half of that will be reimbursed to them upon repayment by 208.
The two agreements need to be tied together, in my opinion.
Okay, Mr. Marshall handle that.
I had that.
And the second issue is that I think there's a typo right under the witness that there's not 8 part-time, there's 6. At least that's what's referred to in here.
I think there's 6 and 2 standbys.
There's 2 standbys.
Okay, and where are the standbys? Are the standbys referred to in here?
Reference somewhere.
Because I found that confusing.
It's the first
That-
page. It says six assigned and 2 standby guards.
Okay, all right.
Used by the village to provide this service. Second paragraph under item commentary.
Not in the agreement. Okay. In the, those referring to the
Cover page.
cover page.
But it's not in the agreement.
Not in the agreement.
I just found that confusing. I think it should be clarified.
Well, the fourth whereas refers to the 50% reimbursement for the school crossing guards as set forth below. And then in 2B, it shows the six locations.
Right. But it doesn't say, but that conflicts with 8 part-time. I mean, somewhere there should be an explanation, because otherwise it makes it look as if there's...
Where do you see 8 part-time?
Right
At the
under
very
witness
beginning.
it.
Says 6
Whereas the
part-time.
village and the
Witnessed.
school district desire to provide for 8 part-time.
Oh, well, we should just make that match what 2A says.
Right.
Yeah,
Yes.
okay.
But with the exception of those 2, which I think are really just clerical issues.
Okay, we can make those changes. Okay. Anything else? Okay, please call the roll.
Trustee Sussman.
Aye.
Trustee Hamilton.
Aye.
Trustee Potter.
Aye.
Trustee Ballerine.
Aye.
Trustee Collins.
Aye.
Trustee Foley.
Aye.
Motion carries. And our final formal piece of business is a resolution authorizing a $550,000 interfund transfer from the general fund to the capital projects fund. Ms. Francis, do you want to present this?
If you'll recall, back in July of this year, we started to discuss our 10-year capital plan, and at that time, there was a brief discussion as to whether or not we transfer just a lump sum at that point in time from the general fund to the capital projects fund. And during that discussion, it was decided that we would hold off until the budget was, the capital projects were decided on for fiscal year 2014, and then I would come back with what basically would be needed to fund 2014 capital. Included with the agenda history sheet is basically a projection from, it shows what the audited fund balance was at the end of December of last year, and then the projected balance as of December 31st of this year. Also included are the revenue that is anticipated in the capital projects fund and expense. Wherein comes in the $550,000 transfer to the capital projects fund. I do have 514. I did include a slight buffer of a little less of 10%, just in case there are any type of change orders that need to be approved by the village board, in case anything does in fact go over. We have that additional buffer. You will also notice that there are different classifications within the capital projects fund. Those particular classifications relate to what revenue is being bought in, and that revenue can only be utilized for certain projects. For example, the non-home rule sales tax can be only used for very street-related programs, whether it's the thermoplastic markings, street resurfacing, etc. Police vehicles, that is funds that we receive from Cook County for supervision fees. Those monies are utilized for changeover within police vehicles. Vehicle replacement, that money has been lingering within the capital projects fund with regard to prior transfers from prior fiscal years. As you will see, we still have money for fiscal year 2014 to fund those particular vehicles. At the end of 2014, we're projected that that balance will be close to depleted. However, the big ticket item in which we're talking about tonight is for all other remaining capital projects budgeted within the capital projects fund, excluding Parks and Recreation. As the board has previously directed, that Parks and Recreation would fund their own capital, and that is an automated transfer based on what their budget is for fiscal year 2014, and will all automatically take place based on not only guidance from the board, but also prior activity in which we did last year where that was automated. As you will notice in the agenda history sheet, the last time that a transfer was made to the Capital Projects Fund as a lump sum was $1 million back in December of 2007. So basically, with the exclusion of the non-home rule sales tax, more recently, Parks and Recreation and police vehicles, all those monies have been dwindling down from that initial $1 million. And so that is what necessitates this particular transfer to fund for 2014. It's strictly just 2014. We're not looking at any future fiscal years. And then obviously at the end of next fiscal year, based on what the budget is, I'll be making a recommendation for potentially a future transfer for that upcoming fiscal year.
So I'd ask for a motion and a second to approve a resolution authorizing a $550,000 interfund transfer from the general fund to capital projects fund.
So moved.
Motion by Ms. Sussman, second by Ms. Hamilton. Discussion, questions? Hearing none, please call the roll.
Trustee Sussman.
Aye.
Trustee Hamilton.
Aye.
Trustee Pollak.
Aye.
Trustee Ballerine.
Aye.
Trustee Collins.
Aye.
Trustee Foley.
Aye.
Motion carries. Thank you, Ms. Francis. So that's it for the ordinances and resolutions. Now we go on to considerations. And first up is a discussion of various revisions to the controlling ordinances, the Landscape Advisory Commission, Preservation Commission, Historical Commission, and Economic Development Commission. And so this is our first chance to really look at these and talk them through. And then once we reach a consensus, we'll put it on to an agenda in the future for final decision. I can give you just a little background, and I think it makes sense to try to consider the Landscape Advisory Commission and the Preservation Commission kind of in tandem, because the one of the existing problems that we've had for the last number of years has been some overlap with regard to commission duties. And based on the comments from the Landscape Advisory Commission and Preservation Commission, the effort in these changes is to really delineate the responsibilities with regard to landscape, which belongs to LAC, and historic structures, which belongs to preservation. So that is the primary thrust of these changes. And then there were some deletions made at the suggestion of staff, where the feeling was that some of the duties that were outlined in the old ordinance really were more appropriately handled by staff. And then with regard to the preservation, and this will be one that I'd like to focus on a little bit more specifically, will be 11-1-4-5, which currently shows the Park and Parkway plantings being removed, but I would like to talk a little bit more about that when we get to that particular section. So I'll just open it up for conversation, and we can kind of go through it section at a time.
I have a question, though. So there will there be a list of approved or of recommended plantings?
Yes, which section are you on?
I'm looking at D, on landscape advisory, under duties. So it'd be 214-4D. It's page 2, in the middle.
This was one of the ones that was removed at the request of Public Works, because there already is the preferred plant list.
But who maintains it and updates it?
It would still be the LAC. And that really goes to the overarching, the master landscape plan.
Yeah, is that where it is? Right above there?
Right.
It says a planting scheme. That includes...
Right. Yeah, G
okay.
specifies it. Right. Any other questions? Ms. Lamatia, did you want to weigh in on this?
Yes, thank you. First of all, I would like to thank the board. I'd like to thank President Sells for taking on the ordinances and the organization of all these overlapping duties and the tedious, exhausting work that it can be. We at the LAC really appreciated that. Specific to G that you were just looking at, one of the concerns that were voiced at the LAC, this item asks for the LAC to provide feedback to public initiatives, public-led initiatives. We, as always, are wondering how we become aware of the same. So is it at the village board's request? Is it through the Public Works Department? Oftentimes it's a volunteer that kind of decides to stroll into a meeting. So there's no chain of command, if you will, or way of the information getting to the LAC. Oftentimes, if a person just isn't a part of the public process, they just don't know to access the LAC.
Where are you at?
Well, it's on item G. I guess it's a couple of people on the LAC often ask how, we're just begging to be in some kind of protocol that says, here's a good time to talk to the LAC, if you didn't know about it. So I guess we're really asking that you keep aware of that as you're going through the ordinance. If there's any time that you could specifically say, this is a good opportunity to collaborate with the LAC, not that we have to be the judges of it, not that it's required, but just to recommend that they speak to the LAC as you go through the ordinance. Something to keep in mind.
Can you give me an example of what you're talking about?
Giving feedback to public-led initiatives. So, for instance, I guess I'll go to Trustee Foley's endeavor at the riverbank. I think it was a very good idea. I think it's great to expose the river, to allow people to run along the river. One of the concerns was that, and they did come and ask our input on that. But then as work proceeded, we did not understand that the brush would be left behind. We didn't understand, it was not called to our attention clearly that the level of cutback that would be done, and there were effects to the river that some of the LAC members were really concerned about. So that one, anything along the river should absolutely be done in tandem with the LAC's information. There were, you can't...
But there were members of your commission that went out and walked that project.
Yes, I did.
Yeah?
I did. So, I mean, we were
So-
involved, but then it was cut back. It was like, they gave us the go-ahead, this is good. And it went beyond what was discussed with our commission.
In the meetings that I attended out there with the village forester, with the village manager, whatever, I think our direction was very clear. We certainly knew what trees were to stay and what trees were scrub trees or could be removed. So I don't think we went out of control on that. Where I find a disconnect in the problem is that the communication to us volunteers on that was fogged a little bit from what we were hearing from LAC, from preservation, from our own village staff.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear what you said. The communication was...
Well, I don't think that we were all on the same page, to put it generally. And talking in that one project sense, what became or what was thought as a resident wanting to do something turned into something else, we could look at it that way. We can also
Right,
look at it as, a bunch of residents who had a good intention of trying to open up the riverbank so you could see the river. And there's miles of riverfront in this town where you can't see the river at all. And those areas, if we were to move forward and to create more of these open spaces, vistas, if you will, so that you can see the river, there has to be better communication.
You've nailed it completely. That's exactly what we're asking for. It's just better communication. If there has to be a special meeting, if other parties, if we have to come to you, if you wish to come to our meeting, but there needs to be, that's what we're begging for. Exactly that. Because they're talking about, through the CMAP initiative, putting a path from one end of Riverside to the other along the river. But it's getting a little bit disconnected. There's different groups looking at different sections. So how does that continuity come in? We should at least be a part of the conversation to alert different parties who might be taking on the endeavor to know what they might be concerned about.
President Sells, if I can speak to an idea that you had about getting the commissions together and taking a walk in that area, just talking about that one idea, the trail idea, and walking that area together collectively as a group of the different commissions that would have input in it. But the commissions have to understand that this is something that the village wants to do. And so your input is taken very seriously, but at the same time, I want to see progress. And I want to see forward movement of some of these things that are within the CMAP that is causing us to reorganize all of the commissions before us tonight and what President Sells has been working on for quite a while. So I just want to see...
We applaud that. We applaud that completely. We're all excited that there's an initiative to move it forward and make things come to reality.
And with regard to the idea about the walk, I mean, we are having regular meetings with all of the various commissions represented who are involved with that. We just had one about a few weeks ago. So anything else?
May I don't know if I can, how you want to handle this, but I can go through a couple of specific points that we had, ideas on. In section 2-14-4, duties, the commission shall have the following duties under just the very first one, A.
Right.
It looks, now, we recommended that you add more resources to the
Right.
list of items that LAC participants should be familiar with.
Right.
And it looks like it's actually been pulled back to make it more open, to say all things that, that have to do with the Frederick Law Olmsted and his landscape architectural firm and their relationship to the general plan of Riverside should be included.
I can speak to that, about why that was removed.
All right, I would like to give you just the one major concern, and
Okay,
and then,
okay.
so it's hard, as a member of the LAC, we just had 2 new commissioners brought on. It's taken me a significant amount of time to ramp up my knowledge, and there's still more to be gained. At the time, Trustee Reynolds gave me a, big, thick document and said, this, it's not in electronic format, we're going to work on doing that, but he said, this is something you need to become familiar with. Here's a smaller booklet you need to become familiar with. If he hadn't done that, I wouldn't have known what resources to look at, and I would have looked at this to find that. So it's important that there's some reference, as far as my experience is concerned, to specific documents. I can still go to the library and become a scholar on Olmsted, but I needed something just to get started in my responsibilities on the commission.
So the thinking behind this, one of the efforts that we've made is to try to make this more like an ordinance and not an operation manual. So the thought is that as an ongoing commission, what materials are out there. Presumably, they'll be supplemented from time to time instead of locking ourselves in to things that were created in 1981 and 1985. So my thought is that as new commissioners come in, the commission itself would be able to provide that kind of information to new commissioners, and to actually list kind of a reading list seems to me, maybe this is my old lawyer self, seems to me to be something that you would not normally put in an ordinance, that you wouldn't actually give a reading list of what somebody should read, that you try to be more generic and more thematic with regard to the basic concept of you're going to familiarize yourself with the planning principles of Olmsted and Vaux. So that was the thinking behind the removing of the particular items. Mr. Ray? Sure, please.
As I'm recalling, because I think we're really talking about the same thing now, the same changes. The references to those 2 documents,
If you could use the microphone.
I'm sorry. The references to those 2 reports was to be deleted,
Yes.
right? To be honest with you, Olmsted did not leave a landscape plan behind for Riverside. He did not. And all the work that has been done to assume what he would have done had he done it was done by the scholars looking at his other works. And that's where those 2 reports were commissioned by this village to do that. That's what they were for. They're paraphrased, and I am assuming that when I read further on in this document, talking about the Salvin.
This was the original.
Right.
And then there have been others that we recommended to be added, which is circled in this box. So the Riverside Landscape 1981, prepared by the Riverside Historical Commission. The Historic Landscape Evaluation and Conservation Plan of Riverside, done in 1985 by Malcolm D. Carnes and Gary B. Kessler. And there's a consolidation done by former trustees Sachi and Reynolds, Straka and Mahaffey. The third item was Charles Beveridge Papers. It's a commentary as contained in 6 volumes at the library, which it took me a year and a half to even find out about. I just didn't know. People who are involved, they just know, but you can't figure it out unless you're, and I was digging. I'm like, somebody tell me. So I think these are critical. The last one was the Riverside ordinances pertaining to Preservation Parks and Recreation Board and this commission. none of the other commissioners, including myself, had read the ordinances as required, and we just didn't know, as citizens, how government was working. And we, as a commission, found these to be critical minimums to being a responsible commissioner on the LAC.
Mr. Pollock?
Well, I understood from my reading of this that by the deletion of those, that the body of that information in those two reports, which were commissioned and paid for by this village, so that they would become guidelines, these I never heard of.
Well, this is here, it's here.
No,
It's the
only
same-
two of those are
so
there.
here's- Right,
Yeah,
we
two of
added
them.
more, so
Okay,
so
Right.
our request is that if you don't
Okay.
want to add more, at least keep the ones that were there.
Well, what they did here is,
So it was-
is in
It's this one.
214.5, they've actually set forth
Yes.
that criteria, right? And that's the way I read it, and
That was formerly under,
214.5 A, B, C, D, E, F, G, and H, which aren't there. You're going to put them there, I hope.
I don't, you know what, I think you are both looking at an earlier draft than the one the trustees are looking at.
Yeah? Well, this is the one,
okay.
this is the one we were asked to review.
That was, right, that was the one that was sent to you on the 8th. The one the trustees also have some changes that have been suggested by staff in it, and we'll get to those.
Oh.
But, okay, so
But
I think.
it's laid out here. In other words, I thought that the deletion of those two documents there was obliviated by the adding of all this information about
Right.
the Salvan environment and, open spaces and blah, 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 all of this 14.5, 214.5 is the criteria that you were supposed to use. That's what I got out of this writing.
So the trustees, you've heard basically the two different theories. One thinks that we should use this to provide a reading list. My thought is that that would actually be a duty best left to the commission to keep whatever kind of study materials or reading requirements that they think a given commissioner should have when they come in, and they would provide those to the commissioners as they come in. And then that would allow an updating of the materials as we go on without having to try to make a code change. So what are your thoughts?
I don't think it should be in the ordinance personally. I think that it would be great for every commission to have some type of a, my mind is blank, binder that is given to the next commission so that everyone is not relearning everything from the beginning. That seems like a terrible waste for them to do that and for you to have come into that, Diane, and not know, you've lost all the knowledge that was learned by someone else. So I think it's really important that each commission would have a binder that is passed on, and that type of information I think is more importantly kept there because, like you said, it can be updated, things can be added to it, and we don't want to come back and be changing the ordinance every time that a new book comes out or publication is made or something about Riverside that is more.
I think that's great. That's certainly something we could instruct the various commissions to do, is to create kind of a manual, for each commission, so that when a new commissioner comes in, they have something that they're handed to help them get up to speed.
For example, on the PTA, when you take over a chairmanship for something on the PTA, you're given a binder of this is what we do. These are, this is how we do things and that. So.
I think that would be invaluable on any commission.
Mr. Pollock?
Well, I agree that it just waters down the ordinance to have it in there. Doesn't mean people can't read it, doesn't mean that the commission shouldn't rely on it. It just allows us in the future, if we amend this, we don't have to worry about that. I mean, you said that it's in there now, yet people haven't read it.
I did read the
So,
two that were
well, I know
there. I read the
you
two that were there, so we added three
Right.
more that I didn't know
So,
about for a long time.
Anyway, yeah, I mean, it can be, it doesn't need to be in there to still be just as relevant, and I think it just waters down. The basic concept of what you're doing is the concepts and principles of Olmsted and his firm and their relationship to the general plan of Riverside. Also, I think this is an example of where our staff is there to educate. I mean, to me, one of the primary functions of our staff is to empower and to educate our commissions and our committees, our volunteers. They're paid professionals.
I can vouch for
And I know they're good at that. and
yes,
know
I
they
can vouch
do
for them.
that.
They're fantastic.
Right, so
No doubt.
if and when there's information like this that the commission needs, then that's what staff's function is to provide that. So I don't see that it's any benefit, and quite frankly, I don't see any real negative to have it in there, but if it's not essential to the ordinance, it probably shouldn't be in there.
Okay, so let's keep moving through.
Okay. All right, so Peter just gave me the newest version. I'm going to go off my old one because I have notes, but I'll at least understand what the changes are now. Okay, on page 3, let's look at my new ordinance here. Item H is what it was. Well, the one that I have, I got to make sure I am looking at the exact same thing. I didn't know that, I didn't realize there was a newer version. To offer recommendations on hardscape within the master landscape plan. And then the more current version reads, to undertake such further studies and projects regarding plantings within the village as may be referred to it from time to time by the village board. So this is not the same item.
So the one you're referring to is at the top, to offer advisory comments on
Okay.
hardscape pursuant to
You've got
Title 8.
okay, thank you.
Thinking that was more accurate in terms of the statutory reference instead of the MLP.
Thank you. So that makes sense. And also, this is, we had a question mark on the consistency of hardscape elements, again, enforced by whom? So this is just another opportunity of the same discussion that we had earlier this evening. So this is putting it to the LAC to at least give recommendations on hardscape,
Yes.
right? Okay, so thank you. Yep. My next question has already been taken care of. Yeah, I'm so sorry. I just didn't know. To prepare from time to time a list of recommended parkway and private property and tree and shrub plantings. You've crossed out the locations, which is fine. That's left to the Department of Public Works, including the Share the Cost Parkway Tree Planting Program provided in Title 8, Chapter 5, which lists shall be approved by the village board. While we do not need to be a part of the permit process, we suggest here that we may offer input as to related to permits if requested by the Director of Public Works.
Well, you certainly have that authority. If the director comes to you, you don't need to say that.
Right, we do. So if you don't think that's worth putting, appropriate to put in the ordinance, I understand, but we thought that might be. Under the annual report and budget, we have no position to be giving the Department of Public Works a recommendation on budget, so that you've removed that, which is excellent. We did want to put to the board, we are not sure if we were able to move to doing public awareness programs or lectures, would we be able to request a budget for that?
Yes.
I mean, it doesn't necessarily need to be in the, I don't know if it needs to be in the
It doesn't
ordinance.
need to be.
It's just something we would request of the board.
Right. That's how EDC does it now. They just come, during the budget process, they present a budget for us to consider with ideas, and then it's managed by them and the village manager.
Okay, thank you. All right, I have to find the right paragraph in the new section that you pulled over from the previous.
Well,
I'm not sure what I'm looking at.
And let
here.
me address that, because that's probably the biggest change you're looking at. LAC had originally requested that section 11-1-4-5 that is currently in the Preservation Commission ordinance be moved in its entirety to the LAC. Staff's response to that was they felt like this language really is policy-oriented. And so that's why it doesn't show up in the LAC ordinance that you're looking at. And as you'll see under the preservation proposed changes, as presented in this document, it would delete that language from preservation as well. After looking at this more closely, and after looking at it in the context of the entire section, which is interestingly enough called public lands in the preservation ordinance, I think a lot of this probably should stay in the preservation ordinance, because what this really goes to is the kind of a general description within the preservation ordinance of the landmark landscape architecture district. So there are sections there that talk about the curvilinear streets, about the gas lights. So this is kind of part of that. There are a few paragraphs in here that probably could be removed. If you look on page 6, I would say the second and third paragraphs could be removed, because again, we're back to the reading list concept. But to the degree, as Mr. Ray was talking about earlier, that the rest of this is really kind of a synopsis, a thematic synopsis of the commission, of the reports that were done at the behest of the village, we might want to leave all of that in the preservation ordinance. Because it doesn't, and the reason I'm thinking it doesn't make sense to move it to LAC is because it doesn't confer authority. And as long as we have the description there with regard to the relevance of it being for protecting of the national landmark status, it seems to me that we accomplish our purpose.
We're very comfortable with that, but I would like to request that there's a reference in the landscape ordinance to this section. I would have loved to have known this right out of the box. I did not know to look at it. I did not look at the ordinances of the other commissions. So if there's any way to just put in a line and suggest that.
Yeah, I can certainly do that. I'll find
we
the
would
appropriate
appreciate
place to do that under duties. I'll insert that under duties.
Okay, everything else we were good with, but I'm going to push one more time. I think that those documents should be left in the ordinance. I understand your argument, but I think they're important enough to fight for a little bit. I think it's. I think they're critical. I think they're critical documents that drive the decision making of this commission moving forward. That the future commissioners should always know that that is their baseline of reference.
I just wonder if we could change the wording as opposed to become familiar with or read to say to utilize those two documents as a foundation.
How about rather than saying to utilize those two documents, to utilize the documents recommended by the Landscape Advisory Committee within their binder that they provide or something? Because again, I don't want to change this every time a new book comes out that we think is relevant.
That's really the issue, right?
Well, that's the responsibility of the LAC. That's what we're saying, is that there's a binder. Reading list. As long as it's in concert with the principles of Olmsted and his firm. I think that's as far as we should.
And again, I see, again, from a technical ordinance drafting standpoint, it seems to me that kind of operational detail is not something that you would normally put into an ordinance.
And I disagree that it's operational.
I understand.
I do. I think it's absolutely
Okay,
critical.
I think we get it.
And,
Mr. Ray?
and I'll push I love the binder idea. I think in all of these extra items, maybe put in that binder. And again, even the PTA, you're handing off critical information from one to the next person who's sitting on those boards. But these two are fundamentals.
I'd like to go on record as saying I agree with her. We're not talking about policies or, I think we're talking about something different than handing over a binder of events or, these are the fundamental books, ones I read, and I think that they belong in the ordinance so that they're not forgotten.
They go to the fundamental design of the village that is what Manager Scalera was mentioning earlier when he was talking about that's why they may come to film here. There are things that drive the village that make it uniquely special that as a citizen I didn't recognize.
If you feel that strongly about it, I have no problem with that.
I'd assume lead those two in and then compile a list too so that we're not.
Two books, that's a sentence.
Can we see those books? I don't, I mean, I'm guessing most of the trustees are like me, we've never seen these books.
And I'm afraid that that's what's going to occur. We're working to get a location, a library, if you will, of documents that we can refer to, because right now they're dispersed. They might be in somebody's home, they might be at the Public Works, they might be in the library, which was referred to me, you can get them at the library. So I go to the library and it's, a huge amount of information. I don't know where to start. I had no idea where to start.
I'm not comfortable putting those documents on
I
the
am
ordinance.
too.
So many of them are not in electronic format to share in that way. So we're working on that as well as another small, another project, if you will.
So can I suggest, we understand the issue, and we're not voting on this tonight, so we can sit with this and we can revisit it next time when we are actually voting.
What are the exact two documents that you're asking about?
They're in here. They're listed. They're just crossed out.
I mean, I would still push for the 5 if I had my druthers, because we really looked hard and found the names of some of these things we didn't even know. They were just referred to, the papers. There are actual Olmsted writings and letters, and everybody would say, well, you just go to the library and find the letters.
This is the Charles
So we
Beveridge
found out that
Papers.
they're called the Charles Beveridge Papers,
Right.
which is why you never heard of them, because nobody actually knows the legitimate name.
But the two that Trustee Ballard and I are asking about are the
two that
Riverside
were in
Landscape
here
from
originally, it's
1981.
the Riverside Landscape 1981 is actually what it's called, prepared by the Riverside Historical Commission. And the Straka Report, as it's commonly referred to, is actually entitled The Historic Landscape Evaluation and Conservation Plan of Riverside. Since the board is not voting on this tonight, I'd be glad to locate those documents so you can see what they are and understand if you'd like to include them in the ordinance.
Okey doke.
Thank you.
Is it about this still? Okay. But I think we get it. I really do.
I can't talk on behalf of the commission, only myself, but I thought it was significant, Article 11-145, which was originally titled Park and Parkway Planning, is a rather interesting synopsis of the basic character of the landscape of Riverside.
We're leading these.
But I'm saying you shouldn't. What I'm saying is, now I'm not on a landscape advisory commission. I know that the Preservation Commission isn't in a position, I shouldn't say that. It is my opinion that the Preservation Commission, who is primarily involved in landmark designation and the attendant process required after you become a designated landmark, and those criteria upon which we have to judge such local landmarks are very specific in our ordinance, very specific. We've never tried to enforce this 11-145, the Salvin environments, plants of various in groupings and open vistas and varying heights and all that sort of thing. We've never been asked to. We've always assumed that the village has gone to their Landscape Advisory Commission for that. You may recall, some of you may recall, that for a while, the Landscape Advisory Commission was eliminated. Remember that? And then it came back because, yeah, there was a need for somebody to to actually enforce this criteria. And those two books, which I'll admit I have not read, I assumed was the 11145, the 10 paragraphs there that talk about what the riverfront should look like, and the commons should look like, and the parkway should look like, and the pocket parks and it should look like, is a pretty darn good synopsis of the thinking of what Olmsted would have done had he done it. Facts are, he didn't. He did not write a paper on what the landscape of Riverside should be. In his original report, he said, interestingly enough, there should be no fences. Everybody's backyard should be open, and you should be required to plant a tree. And that's the sum total of his writings, as far as I can find out, about Riverside.
We did one of the two.
Okay? Now, so I thought this was good writing, and I thought moving it to the Landscape Advisory Commission, the Landscape Advisory Commission ordinance was an appropriate thing to do. That's my opinion, and certainly, if that's not true, and I'm quite sure that the drafters of the preservation ordinance, knowing that it wasn't being quite done as part of the Landscape Advisory Commission, included it in the preservation ordinance. That's our latest ordinance. But if the two references here to these, and the ones that you've cited are the proper ones that the Landscape Advisory Commission should be using to decide to create these plans, to create the plans for the village. They should be responsible for creating those plans, and they should be following those guidelines. And by golly, they should be there. That's my opinion. Just mine.
And following the strength of your assertion, I will say that we were extremely thoughtful as a commission in reading all of these and in choosing which items we felt should be moved from the Preservation Commission to the LAC. So perhaps I gave in too easily. But we were very thoughtful about it, and we felt that and I guess I understand your argument, which is why I said, well, it's okay. But to be a little more thoughtful and responsible in my response to that, I would have to say that I think that the LAC does make a significant difference to the preservation of our historic community. And I think even to give our ordinance a little bit more, to shore it up a little bit stronger, moving this information to the LAC's ordinance section makes sense, because truly the Preservation Commission would never consider any of this, and this is what we do all the time.
And I agree with Diana on that. I was present at several of those discussions that took place on this, and it made absolute sense to move this language over, because that's where part of the confusion was coming from, over who has overlapping responsibilities. And as far as landscape went, this type of language continually refers to the principles that inform landscape design, and they belong in the landscape advisory section.
And truly, that is what we were charged to do, to eliminate the overlap. So to eliminate the overlap, this absolutely should be moved to the landscape advisory ordinance.
So, yeah, and we can do that, but let me just, because you don't have to, this is section 11-1-4, public lands. This is in the Preservation Commission ordinance. And there are a number of items that come under public lands. The first one is the Riverside Landscape Architectural District. Then we have the planning concept for Riverside that talks about, and this, interestingly, this is the only place I've found anything even approaching the definition of public lands in our entire code. The next section is the ornamental street lighting system, the curvilinear roadway system, the parks and parkway plantings, historical monuments, markers, and artifacts, recreation areas and structures, residential properties, So what you have here in this section is really an encapsulation of the various factors that go into the historic landmark landscape district. So it may well be that we can either do it by reference, we can repeat it and have it in both sections, but it seems to me from a theoretical standpoint, it does belong in the preservation ordinance, because the preservation ordinance, remember, isn't only about the Preservation Commission. The Preservation Commission is only one part of the preservation ordinance.
I think all of the items that you iterated, except for the landscape plantings, belong to hardscape issues that do relate very much to preservation. But I think that this section, which refers to the landscape, the softscape, really should be under landscape divide.
So do you want to move it?
And then there can be a reference under that.
Okay, we'll move it. That's
fine.
I think that when it goes into as much detail as it does here, it gives the impression that preservation has responsibility over this. So I understand what you're saying, Ben, but maybe we can do 1 or 2 sentences.
Well, we'll just move it.
And then refer to it, if you want to, within preservation, refer back to landscape rather than referring the other way around.
That's easy to do.
Thank you.
Anything else for landscape?
That's all.
Okay, how about,
Thank you so much.
you're welcome. Thank you for coming.
I guess the one other thing is that I didn't see, and perhaps it's in your new information, but I didn't see any of the suggestions we had for parks and recreation overlap referred to in this at all.
Those have already been addressed and handled by staff.
Great, thank you.
Anything with regard to the Preservation Commission, other than what we've already just talked about? The economic...
Quick question, I'm sorry. Could you just review why the commissions have different numbers of commissioners? I know that, and different terms of office.
I have absolutely no idea. And I mean, one thought when we first started this process, one thought was to try to standardize all of that.
That's what I'm asking, yeah.
But as you go through, I mean, the most common number is 7 for the commissions. The Planning and Zoning Commission is determined by statute, so that number cannot be changed. And given all the different appointments that are already outstanding and the terms are already underway,
okay.
it just seemed like it was not worth for a theoretical
Okay,
exercise
thanks.
to try to standardize it all.
I think it can offer some insight on preservation.
Sure.
The initial ordinance, when it was reviewed by the Planning Commission, the initial preservation ordinance, we made the suggestion that there be a member from the Plan Commission on the Preservation Commission. And Historic did the same thing. Dorothy Unger at the time said, no, we should have a representative. So the 7 went to 9, and 1 member was appointed from the Plan Commission, I was the appointee, and 1 from the Historical Commission. And I forgot who that was initially, but it wound up being Nancy Foley, about a year after we got going. So that's how that happened. The other thing is, you'll notice that there's a minimum of 5 votes necessary to recommend a local historic designation to the board. But the board has the final say over designating a local historic landmark. And it was felt that they needed that there needed to be a quorum of 5, minimum 5 of those 9 to do that. So to change that and cut the number back, because the requirement that 1 person from the Plan Commission and 1 person from the Historical Commission be appointed from those commissions was deleted a few years back. So as were the requirements, there were fairly specific requirements for qualifying to be named as a commission member, which were also deleted.
Given that fact, do you think it would be better to have 7 members on your commission?
I suspect that the 9 is better, because you need a quorum to do business, and you need a quorum to make a recommendation. So pretty generally, it's hard to get everybody there. So we need a quorum. We need 5 to have a quorum of the 9, and that's enough to do business.
But you'd only need 4 if you had 7.
But you need 5 to make a recommendation.
Yeah.
Well, you could change that.
Yeah.
We could change that.
Yeah, but it was, I think it was spelled, and you could,
I mean,
the only person who would really know would be David Newman, who would,
I mean, Chairperson Pipel requested that it be left at 9, which is why.
yeah, I think it should be left at 9, and I'm just trying to explain how it's got to be that high, and more than any other commission. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. So let's move now to the Historical Commission. You will note that in the Historical Commission that 2-20-5, the annual report and budget paragraph that was omitted, or that was deleted with regard to LAC and EDC was left in, and that's because of the different nature of the Historical Commission with regard to their fundraising, and that they actually have monies of their own. So it was thought, after talking about with the attorneys, that we should leave that in with regard to historical.
Excuse me, I wanted to go back to the duties of preservation. We didn't actually talk about those. I had raised concerns about the landscape, but here, again, we're eliminating any kind of reviewing of the downtown by preservation, and I think preservation should be involved in that sort of thing.
Well, they are involved by Title 11 with regard to landmark buildings. So if the effort is to delineate their authority with regard to landmark structures, they already have that authority of review under.
No, it's not. It's because, Peter, help me with this. When we get the designation, aren't all the structures in the village seen as contributing structures?
No.
Or just the houses?
And not even all the houses.
I thought they were all. I thought the last report was all of them.
They're non-contributing structures.
That still hasn't been resolved, but any building that's over 50 years old and essentially its original condition is considered contributing to the landscape district.
So, for instance, the Riverside Plumbing has preservation status, which means that according to this, there's no oversight by preservation.
No, there wouldn't, because they're landmark.
But the building next door to it, there's no oversight. So preservation could look at curb cuts for the Riverside Plumbing, but they couldn't look at curb cuts for Basilis.
Because that's their charge is with regard to landmark structures.
No, I know, but I'm asking the logical question as opposed to
But their
taking that
charge
oversight
is for-
away.
But their charge is for historic structures, not for all structures. There are other groups within the village that have that type of oversight.
Well, not the hardscape goes back to the same question. We took that away from all the commissions. So there aren't other groups that have that in the downtown area.
Okay,
So
but
that's
we
my
have a
concern.
small downtown with delineated buildings with an excellent staff that looks at that type of issue. We have plenty of ordinances that protect us in that regard.
Well, the Planning and Zoning
Actually,
Commission
John.
has authority.
Right,
Yeah.
they're going to be looking at that, the Planning and Zoning Commission will be
Okay.
looking at that.
All right.
Anything else with preservation? With regard to historical, you'll notice on page 8 that the 3 sections that were deleted at the request of the Historical Commission because they thought that showed an overlap with regard to preservation. So that's why D and E were taken out. And they also requested section F to be taken out. And everything else is just minor language changes. And with regard to economic development, it's all of the changes were really just minor language changes to try to kind of update their new vision of their work. So, if there's nothing else, we will consider this again at our January meeting. We'll make the changes that have been recommended. And,
I just have a general question. In the ordinances where I understand about the annual report and the budget being taken out, were those ever enforced?
No.
Oh,
That's one of the
okay.
reasons. That's one of the reasons we took them out. That's one of the reasons we took them out.
Yeah.
Exactly. Okay. Mr. Foley?
A long time ago, months ago, when we talked about the reorganization of all these commissions, about creating some sort of for lack of better words, like a overall larger committee of the chairs of those commissions meeting together to take direction from us and back to their commissions. Are we still contemplating an idea like that?
You know, the next thing we're going to talk about is the strategy session in January. That would be a good thing to talk about there.
Okay.
We're kind of doing it at an ad hoc level with regard to the CMAP projects, like the meeting we just had with regard to the pathway and the various projects with regard to CMAP. You know, had members of LAC was there, member Floss was there, the EDC was there. So where they're in Parks and Rec, where there is an overlap on a given project, that's already happening. But it may be that we want to have some kind of quarterly meeting of all the chairs.
And to Diana's point of the communication, I think when you have something like that, then they can find out what's going on other commissions and see whether or not they need to have input in that. Otherwise, things are operating independently.
Right. Which brings us into the next question is about having and I don't know whether we want to do this. It might not be such a good idea to do it at our January meeting since we now have a break since we're not meeting the first meeting in January. Maybe we would want to have the strategy kind of session in February because we're probably going to have a build-up of work to do for our solo meeting in January. But the thought is it would be an opportunity because we've started a lot here in the last several months, and a lot has already been accomplished, but it might be worthwhile as a board to take a breath, see where we are on the various projects that we have underway, and prioritize our work for 2014. So are you all cool with doing that?
That's great.
I have to go back to the EDC. I'm sorry, I have one more question. I know that you had thought about this, about requiring that one of the members be from the chamber.
That was a suggestion that had been made by one of the members of the EDC. And I can't really put my finger on why I think it's not a good idea to require something like that.
You might not have a chamber member that lives in the village. To be part of a commission, you have to be a resident.
There are plenty of chamber members
Well, I'm
within
just
the
saying, it
village,
could
yeah.
be you may limit.
Right, and you can't require another organization to give you a member.
Right.
If that's what you're referring
that's
to.
the other issue, right.
Yeah.
They might
It
not
just-
want to be on the EDC.
Right, they could say no.
Right. It's hard to imagine, but it's possible. Okay. New business? So, happy holidays, everyone, to everyone at home. We'll see you next year. I'd ask for a motion and a second to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Motion by Ms. Collins,
Second.
second by Mr. Foley. Please call the roll.
Trustee Sussman.
Aye.
Trustee Hamilton.
Aye.
Trustee Pollock.
Aye.
Trustee Valerie.
Aye.
Trustee Collins.
Aye.
Trustee Foley.
The meeting is adjourned.